You are a cultural pioneer, or as I'd like to say, a culture-neer. You're daring to go where others aren't willing to go. The unknown doesn't scare you, it intrigues you. You're not satisfied with the status quo. Business as usual is not in your DNA. You're done with doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You're an explorer at heart and a trendsetter by nature. You were born with purpose, called to lead, destined to make a difference. You are a Culture-neer.
Hey, welcome to the Culture-neer Podcast, where we explore how faith, conviction, and leadership shape culture, especially in the marketplace. Today's guest is someone who spent years challenging leaders to integrate faith and work in a way that's real, intentional, and internally focused. Mike Sharrow is a husband, father, apprentice of Jesus, and he's the CEO of the C12 Business Forum. That's the world's largest peer learning organization for Christian CEOs and executives, impacting businesses that employ nearly 1 million people across the globe. Mike, welcome to the show.
Terry, it's a joy to be with you.
I'm excited. I'm excited for our audience as well as me to learn a little bit more about what you're doing, because I feel like it's so strategic, starting with the people of influence and helping shape the culture, it's within their organizations. But before we learn about all your professional exploits, I'd like to start, if you don't mind, and our listeners get to know you a little bit more personally, if that's okay.
You can go wherever you want, Terry. I trust you.
All right. Okay. Well, that's earned. So we'll see. All right. So before all the titles, before all the C12, the speaking, the leadership, tell us about your family. Where'd you grow up? What were some of your early experiences that helped shape your faith, all that good stuff?
Yeah. I grew up in Alaska. I'm joining you from Texas today. So I identify as an immigrant living in Texas, which the Texans also affirm when they meet me. And I was actually just giving a talk yesterday at a event in Austin, Texas, where they asked me to share my testimony. And I said, hey, I would identify as a trophy of God's grace. Like I think God's got a trophy room. I just envision these trophy rooms where he's like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then there's this era. And I think there'd be a shelf where he'd be like, let me show this guy, Mike. Look what I can do. Like my story just is a story of his grace. So I grew up in Alaska. I grew up in a small family, military family. I'm the first person in 3 generations not to do the military, and I would have if I hadn't been crippled from a young age with a severe autoimmune disease that kind of just threw a lot of my dreams and natural trajectories kind of out the window. Have a weird kind of blend. Grew up in Alaska is a great state to learn majesty of God and to see the creative power of God. I mean, that place just makes my soul sing. It is so stinking beautiful. It's a little, we've been in an era where there's a lot of talk about like equity and equitability of things. God was not equitable in his distribution of creative power. Like if you compare Alaska to West Texas, it's like God was apparently tired by the time he got to West Texas. He was energized in Alaska. So met Jesus at a young age, was passionately, just came to know him. He became super real in my life, and the word of God came alive. And so that was the single most transformative, defining thing. My life to here, there's kind of some funky highs and lows. Like the family that loved me and did their best, a lot of blended family stuff, a lot of divorces, kind of highs and lows, a lot of financial challenges and health challenges that kind of shaped a lot of my childhood. My teen years got weird. My parents went through a divorce. My mom had a brain injury, and I became her primary caregiver. And so by early teen years, I was suddenly doing correspondence school for myself, helping homeschool my little brother, caring for her, and kind of navigating a whole world of public benefits and such. So I would have never guessed. Like I used to say when I was 12 years old, I was at a church retreat. My pastor said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I have no clue, Pastor Ken. I know 2 things. I'm never going to live in Texas, and I'm never going to work for like a church. And in 2006, my wife, who's a Midwest farmer's daughter, I met in Chicago. We moved to Texas in 2006, and then in 2008, the church we were attending asked if I'd come on staff in an executive capacity for a couple of years, and I found myself being like, man, I did the 2 things I said I'd never do. So, God redeemed all sorts of stuff. So that's funny. Unusual background.
Yeah, it's funny how he orchestrates all that, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
A lot in common. I was born in Kingsville, Texas. I'm going to Alaska for the first time in July, taking my boys.
Fantastic.
Uh, I would have been a fourth generation military guy. I signed up and got to the physical and found out I had hearing loss, and they sent me back home.
Yeah,
So yeah, I can relate to some of what you're saying today. Um, so young age, you didn't really know. You knew what you didn't want to do.
that's right.
Um, how did the early years, do you think, help shape your calling today? How do you connect the dots on that? It seems like you learned a lot of responsibility at a very young age, learned how to multitask, probably execute, but
Hmm.
what, what did that look like to you?
Like in retrospect, things make more sense. But at the time, in fact, I found one of my old like middle school journals, and I literally I found an entry where I literally put, maybe one day my brother will do this and someone else do this, but I could never do that because I don't know anything about business. Like we had
Mm,
no entrepreneurs in the family, no exposure to that. So I never was seeing this. I did. I think the childhood forged a couple things. Yeah, I had to learn how to work hard. Had to figure things out. Had a lot of responsibility. Was competitive. Had a real strong sense that, man, people matter. Like God cares about people, and I became really acutely exposed to vulnerable people and wanting to make a difference in people's lives. And as I grew in my faith in Jesus, I knew that whatever I was going to do needed to be a kingdom thing, quote unquote, but not knowing what that meant. In fact, my dilemma was I was like, man, I really don't want to work for the local church or be a missionary, but I also don't want to like not be about what matters to God.
mhm.
And I didn't really know how those worlds could ever come together. In fact, when I went to school and I ended up getting a business degree and I was working at a company, I just had this real like internal struggle because I was like, man, I like working. I'm a hard worker. I enjoy working. I enjoy solving problems. I was finding skills I had, but I was like, man, I want to be about Jesus stuff. And I felt like those were like competing interests where I was trying to like balance out volunteer time and business time and making money, giving money. So I think the thing that put me on the right track was, man, I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do stuff that mattered. I felt an implicit sense that like I don't take life for granted, and I also watched, man, I watched my dad struggle with miserable jobs and miserable places, and I saw how much people I loved came out of workplaces chewed up and spit out, and I was like, man, does business have to be that way?
Mm.
So those are probably some of the things that were sown then. Never envisioned I'd get a chance to help shape those or change those.
Yeah. Was there a moment there like, man, this was an awakening for me that um, I can do this in the workplace?
Yeah, it was actually. You ever complain to God? Ever whine to God?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I was having a not spiritual moment. I was in Chicago working for a company, having some early success in a role, and I sat at my desk one night. All my employees had gone home, and I was kind of like, "Is this it? Like, do I just get bigger, make more money, do more things? Like, I'm making widgets. What does this matter?" And I sat at my desk and I took out a pad of paper and I was like, God, I feel like I'm made for more than this. And I felt like the Holy Spirit like met me at my desk
Mm.
and we had a one-on-one, and it was a defining moment. But it was him taking my frustration where he's like, what do you think you're called to do? So I took out a piece of paper and I wrote down the things I knew biblically were true. Like, I'm called to be a disciple of Jesus. I'm called to be a ambassador of Christ, a minister of the gospel. I'm called to make disciples. I'm called to fulfill the Great Commission. Like all these things, wrote this stuff out. And he's like, why aren't you doing that? I was like, well, I'm doing it on Sunday and Wednesday night and Monday night. And I'm like, there's only so many evenings and margin times you can do. And then I'm working here. So God, how are you going to provide for me to go do this stuff? And then the disruptive question that I felt like the Holy Spirit prompted me with was, does the logo on your shirt define your identity, or does your
Oh.
identity transform your logo?
Oh.
And I went, what? He's like, so does where you are change who you are? I'm like, well, no. And I was not like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde hypocrite at work, but I definitely had like two modes where I was like business mode, who everyone knew I went to church. And then you did ministry stuff like church and weekends and evenings. And when he went, well, why is there any difference by who you are on Sunday versus who you are on Tuesday or Thursday? And I went, God, I'm working for a publicly traded company. Like, I don't know how to do that kind of stuff in the context of business. I don't know what you think about this stuff. And he went, oh, well, how about instead of asking me to change your context, why don't you start asking me how to be who I've made you to be right where you are? And so I literally journaled that night, like, God, I have no idea how to be who you've made me to be where I am. Would you show me? And that was like this, like Alice in Wonderland falling down a rabbit hole, beginning of an odyssey of going like, what if my job and business isn't the obstacle to ministry, but it's actually the context of it? And what if God actually cares about what I do and how I do it? And what if business is actually a gymnasium of my own faith? Because then I had a coworker who was not a Christian who was like, hey, Mike, you're religious. Do you judge your religion by what you do on Sunday or by what you do on Thursday? Like, what's your judge of your spirituality? And I went, what a weird question. What? He's like, I'm just curious, like, as a Christian, is that based on how much you go to church? Or is there something like I would see here that would define that you're successful at your religion? And it was one of those questions where I was like, I don't like I don't know how I answered it. I walked away like arguing with my head, being like, I think I'm a pretty good Christian. And then I went, well, but if I judged today's question, if I judged my spirituality by how I am on Thursday afternoon dealing with accounting issues and technology issues and contracting negotiations versus how I am on Sunday morning teaching a Sunday school class, I don't know if I'm actually as great a Christian as I think I am. Like, so that was the inflection point where everything changed for my career.
I bet it did.
How about you? When did that spark happen for you?
You know, we started a company we're going into the year 18. And I felt like in a lot of ways I was there, but I was doing work and I was more detached from ministry. And I thought, well, this is just, it's what it is. It wasn't something I was really proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And there was two moments. There was a moment where God just, I mean, it's plain as day. He said, your purpose is to help other people discover their purpose. It's like, okay. So we started leaning into that. You know, we had always prided ourselves in the kind of people that we chose, how we took care of them. You know, we didn't advertise that we were a faith-based company. You just knew it as soon as you stepped in the door. But from the outside looking in, you didn't know. We wanted that to be earned, not a badge that we wore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a couple more years as we started leaning into that and being intentional. I had a guy, there was two other moments. I had a guy walk into my office and sat down, and he was in our production department. And he won't mind me sharing this if he listens to this, but he started asking for advice about how to deal with a real sensitive situation, um, about somebody that was contemplating um, if life was just too much to bear. I'll put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. Despair.
So we kind of talked through it, and he said, "Yeah, I need some advice on how to handle it." Well, the longer we talked, I realized that we were talking about his daughter, and it was a heavy moment. And he said, "You know, I knew this was the right place to go. My wife was asking, why are you going in to talk to your bosses about this? Why don't you talk to your dad? So my dad knows how to make a lot of money, but he doesn't know anything about being a dad. I'm going to go talk to the guys at work because I know they're going to give me some good advice." And he walked out of that room. And God just reminded me, it's so much more than you think. And you need to open your eyes. And then about a year later, I had all these guys on a trip, and we were celebrating. It was just about them. We were in the mountains. We're around a circle with a fire. And I'm challenging these guys to think about, what do you want 3 and 4 generations from now? What kind of influence do you want to leave on them? What do you want that to look like? And they all had a little man, plastic army man. And I said, when we come around and after you share that, what's the one thing that's holding you back? I want that man to represent that. I want you to throw it in the fire. And I watched these men go around the circle from all different walks of life, 3 different states, different ages, different economic backgrounds, most of them weeping as they would throw things into the fire and talk about what they wanted it to look like. And God spoke to me. He said, I've called you to pastor these people. I said, okay. And so those were the big moments for me.
Yeah.
And we've just continued to lean into it. And now it's like, how can we amplify that? Because that's not a message just spoken to me, just like the message spoken to you about Thursday is not just for Mike. I think that's a question God's asking every believer that's sitting in a marketplace. Different assignment, maybe different call, but same mandate, similar mission. And that's why we're talking today.
That's so good. I mean, so parallels, we didn't obviously scripting this in advance. Like I've similarly done a lot of work on like, God, what is my purpose? And my purpose statement, I got to a number of years ago, was literally, I exist to be a catalyst for people to live their destiny in Christ, which it's mean I love helping people discover what is your purpose and go do that. And then I want to build platforms that advance the gospel in sustainable ways. And most of those are going to be for-profit platforms. The next week when I came back to work after that Friday morning kind of woodshed conversation with the Holy Spirit, I looked around my office. I had 67 employees at the time. 2 went to church of some kind. So I had 60 plus people who they weren't going to church. They're coming to work 40, 50 hours a week with me. And I had people with all different backgrounds, all different situations. And I went, man, I've got more people with more time spending time with me than go to a local church from their background. Like my church doesn't have 60 unsaved people sitting in their pews every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And, you did your opening line about this podcast about leadership and culture and all this kind of stuff. I was in Washington, D.C. years ago for a Supreme Court case. And then we met with this legal team beforehand, and they were doing all the strategic conversations around judges and case law and all sorts of stuff that's important and cool. And the CEO of this think tank said he was explaining like this 15-year strategy to address laws in America and things. But then he stopped and said, hey, but as important as laws are and judges and senators and Congress people, those are all super important deals and civic duties important. He looked at me in the back of the room. He said, but that guy, Mike, he may lead the most dangerous business in America today. And I'm like, dangerous? Like, we're not like politically active. We're not right. I'm like, well, dangerous. That sounds a little like violent. He's like, no. Dangerous because you serve this network of business owners, and every day, no matter who the president is, no matter who's a judge, no matter who's a congressman, no matter what laws are being kicked around in DC, a business owner gets to shape the culture of employees, and that affects their families, and that affects their kids, and you get to affect your supplier. Like if you choose to, either by design or by default, you can change culture more profoundly than anybody in Washington, D.C. can. He's like, we can put, walls and headwinds, and we can affect things, but frankly, the average local business owner has more power to shape lives tomorrow than anybody in Washington, D.C. does if they choose to steward it.
That's so true. That is so true. And I think I've had a front row seat to see that. And
Sounds like
that's what's caused me to become more and more passionate about that. I've got a gentleman now I've watched him going on 3 years, and younger guy. And I'm watching him transform right before our eyes. And I remember in the interview process, him telling me something about going to church. And I knew he was just feeding me a line. I asked him, well, what's the name of that pastor over there? And he couldn't even tell me. I just let it pass. So we just kept talking, and we hired him. I felt like, this guy's really supposed to be here. And 2.5 years down the road, I actually went to a church service where that morning, him, his wife, his 3 kids, and his dad were all getting baptized in the same service.
Yeah.
And we're big on leadership development. Actually, we say at our company, we're a leadership development company. We just happen to provide home improvement solutions. It's really like we're we're a ministry in disguise.
Funny, your vision statement said something about forging servant leaders who change the world or make a difference in the world or something like that, right?
Yeah. And so these guys, they're on forced reading tracks, depending on, there's part of it's mandatory, and then there's part of it that becomes optional. There's a couple $100. And I knew this guy had dropped out in the 8th grade. He was excellent with his hands. I said, tell me how many books you read before you came here. We were at a meeting. He said, absolutely none since I got out of school. I said, well, how many books you've read in the last 2 years? He said, about 20. He said, and my wife said that if I ever lose this job, she's going to kill me. I said, why would she say that? He said, because I go home a different guy. And our measurement of success is on a challenge coin that we give everybody on their first day to carry in their pocket. And, say, what you make here, you know, um, that should be competitive. It should be good, but it should be the least thing that we give you. But when you're 10 years over here, the real measure of success for us is, were you a better father?
Mm-hmm.
Were you a better husband? And were you a better leader? So we can check those 3 boxes. We've been successful. And I get a front row seat to see that every week at various levels. Some of it's just beginning, with one guy that's been with us 14 years, on the other end of the spectrum. And it's energizing, but it gives me a picture of what we're talking about. This could and should happen all over America every Monday morning.
Okay, so I literally was just in Austin, Texas yesterday. This big financial services company is having their annual summit of hundreds of people from around the country. And I got to go share my testimony, but part of it was because I'd met with the CEO last year and had shared a practice in my life that he went, I'm going to adopt that. And then he rolled it out as a company thing. He did it. He took my idea and made it better. When I turned 30, my wife gave me a birthday gift of a giant glass cylinder with a blue marble for every week of life expectancy I had left, actuarially speaking, and then an empty one. And every Saturday night since then, I move a marble from the theoretically available. We don't know if we got tomorrow, right? But actuarially speaking, and I drop it in this spent column because it's the one thing you and I can't get more of. Like, we can make money, lose money, we can rebound and other things, but we don't get time back. And it's become a Saturday night Bema seat preview moment for me to go, hey, God, what about this week mattered? Like, what about this week 10 years from now, 20 years from now, will I go, that was worth it? And frankly, a lot of things we get stressed about won't matter a year from now. And a lot of things we get jazzed about won't matter a month from now, let alone 5 years from now. But it's been this really healthy ritual for me of, hey, sometimes those are moments where I'm like high-fiving with God and I feel like his fatherly approval. There's sometimes you're like, man, that was just a week. I want to rebound, pivot. But I feel like it's 52 weekly like pivot opportunities for me to try to live on mission, live on purpose. Well, this guy decided to make his whole company's rally cry this year, make it count. And so he gave everybody a blue marble for every week of the year, so 52. And one of these, and he said, we're going to start every week ending our team meetings with, tell me what's the blue marble moment. When did you do something for somebody that wasn't about a sale, that wasn't about the business winning, but where would you say this week you knew you made it count in someone else's life? And he's like, what would it look like if at the end of the year, every employee had 52 stories that I made a difference in someone's life this week? And I was like, man, I can't wait to see what comes out of that. And he went,
yeah,
half you guys won't work here 10 years from now, but everything you did with those marbles, that will still exist. Like that will still exist.
I may have to borrow that. That's pretty challenging. I just it's an old message and even an older book. It's called Driven by Eternity, and I just came across it. Are you familiar with it?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what, it really rocked me because I so identify with what he was saying. We talk a lot about salvation in America,
Yeah.
and when we get past that, most people don't live their life like there's anything else. There's no other judgment. There's no other reckoning.
The Bema
Or
seat's
how
not preached about.
that's right. And we have to connect those dots, to purpose.
I like to
And
say there is a final exam. The good news is it's an open book test, and God wants you to get an A. And A, it's not about entrance. It's not an entrance exam. Like, that's taken care of. But there is reward. There is stuff that matters. And I love the fact 1 Corinthians 15 says that if you do work in the Lord, it is not in vain. Now, the reality is you could do everything smart, Terry, and you could lose your roofing company, right? Like, you can do everything right and lose your wedding venue and your retreat center. Like, you can't control a tornado, a fire, a whatever. So we're not guaranteed that our work endures in the sense of preservation of wealth or what we did. But we can know if we did it in Christ, even if we do lose everything, that was not in vain. And that's pretty awesome. Like, the ultimate insurance policy is to do the stuff that's transferable, that matters no matter what happens to the economy.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Are we off track?
Well,
I don't know where we're going. I'm loving this.
no, I think we're just following the breadcrumbs. I think this is
Okay.
good stuff. So, um, get us back on maybe a little bit before C12.
Yeah.
Before that really became your mission, you were a member. Like,
Mhm.
what were you searching for at that stage of your life when you were a member?
So I would have actually probably thought I wasn't searching. Candidly, a buddy of mine was the first member of a C12 group in my city. I'd never heard of it. And I was known at that point, living in Texas. I'd been in business. Been an executive pastor at church. I started a business. I was involved in a lot of leadership things in the city. So people knew, like, hey, Mike's the guy who loves Jesus, loves leadership, loves business. Those kind of things are his jam. So I kind of thought I was doing pretty good. And a buddy kept saying, hey, you got to come check out this group. And I was like, man, I don't need one more group. I think, frankly, a lot of Christian business things are weird or wacky or hokey or lame, odd for God, name it and claim it. You know, some people are, to your earlier point, some people are obnoxious with the symbols of faith, but they don't really earn the brand of that. Like,
Yeah.
people should accuse you of being Christian because you're so like Christ. You know, careful claiming to be like Christ when the world is surprised by that. So anyway, he one day drew 3 circles on a napkin that pricked my heart of attention. He said, Mike, do you feel the tension ever of knowing that we're supposed to do work as worship? We're supposed to honor God in what we do. The Bible says, do all things as unto Christ, do all things to the glory of God. You're trying to do that, right, Mike? I'm like, yeah, I'm all about that. He's like, how do you know if you're doing it right? I was like, true, it is a bit of a vague target. Like, it's a directional pursuit, but I don't really know what the bullseye looks like. And he's like, well, that's important. Do you feel like your life is about more than just giving money to ministry, but that you've actually got responsibility to do ministry? I said, of course. And he's like, well, oftentimes we do that in circles that are just focused on external things, not inside the business. And he said, third, who holds you accountable to not just do great things for God and shave into the world, but to be a son of God, a husband to Jackie, a father to girls, and to have the fruit of the Spirit in my life as you do all that in the context of your leadership? And he said, don't you find you're addressing those 3 issues in different circles, small group and counselors, ministry teams, business consultants, but they're not like integrated? And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, this would kind of pull those together. Would you come check it out? And so I literally went, if I go to a stupid meeting, will you stop nagging me about this? Because I don't need one more thing. And he went, yeah, just come to a meeting. So I went to a meeting, was super cynical, had a bad attitude, asked a bunch of awkward questions, was like, is this a timeshare sale? Where's the trap door? What's the...
Odd for God. I'm never going to forget that. Sorry. Odd for God. That's so appropriate.
We also talk about people who get sloppy agape, where they just like get goofy with grace and don't do excellence or accountability. And then you get other people who are like good old boy clubs, where they just run moral businesses and think by giving a little bit of money away, they're baptizing their business venture because God's like excited to get a few points of their liquidity or something. I found myself, I walked away from that meeting and went, I didn't know how badly I needed this. And so I joined. And I joined in August. We'll get more later. Our model is there's always a full-time leader of the group, a chair or a business coach. And my chair, about a year later, went, hey, Mike, you love this stuff. Like, you are eating this stuff up. Have you ever thought about like doing my job? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, I think you should think about it. Ended up doing that, ended up buying out an area. And then about 10 years ago, when I took over the parent company as the 3rd CEO, I immediately joined a C12 group again as a customer. So I'm actually a customer of a group again. And there's not a week that goes by I'm not talking with peers in my forum for advice, counsel, encouragement on how to do this stuff.
So give us a little bit more about the heartbeat of C12, like its mission and why it really matters now out there.
Our mission is, how do you equip a Christian CEO or business owner or entrepreneur to build a really great business? We don't think God's glorified by poorly run companies that have fishes on them or just putting Bible verses on the wall. We think like a company ran to the glory of God should have fantastic culture, brand, customer reputation, bank covenants, margin, like all those things. If it's like God didn't build a tabernacle held together by spit and bubble gum and duct tape, we never see God building things in creation that's just kind of barely working. Like, he's a God of excellence and design. So we think building a great business is actually an act of worship, and it should be done for a greater purpose. So our mission statement is to equip Christian CEOs and owners to build great businesses, but to do it for a greater purpose. And our vision The why behind that is that as we help them do that, we want to change the world by advancing the gospel through the marketplace. And the real idea there is, man, the average business owner has got more collective impact opportunity in their city than the typical local church pastor does. And sometimes exponentially more. If you think about, like, how many employees do you have at Integrity?
35.
Okay, so you think 35 employees. I've got 35 employees in my HQ team here. A bunch of them are probably married, not all but some, and a bunch of them probably have kids. And so there's family units, and you've got suppliers and vendors who are selling you all your materials and goods, and you got people who are selling on you. You've got customers that you're selling to and serving. You've got your industry trade group you're part of. Like, if you map out your mission field as a business and quantify all those different domains, and then you go statistically, depending where you live in the country, probably 70-80% of those people don't go to any church. That would put you in the category of being like one of the most outreach-oriented mega churches for the audience you get a chance to influence. And if you start going, how do I steward that? We think it can really, truly change the world. So that's the mission that drives us is, I think, and we actually know this statistically, about 85% of business owners or CEOs or presidents, they're living like I was before that Holy Spirit moment, where it's two worlds, suspended animation. They go to church, they probably give, they're hopefully operating with integrity, but they view their world as kind of like, I run a machine shop. I'm an accountant. I run a physical therapy clinic, and I try to do a good job. And I try to give as much as I can and serve as much as I can, but kind of living in suspended animation and not realizing that, man, who you are should be driving wherever you are all the time. And so we think we got a chance to awaken men and women in business to go, man, your business matters to God. What you're doing matters to God. You can, like, you were in a dangerous spot, embrace it. And, man, let's help them solve isolation and loneliness and fatigue, and let's give best practices, and let's see the name of Christ be revered in the marketplace by, like, when I was a chair in San Antonio, where I live now, 40% of all the Best Place to Work award winners in the city by the Business Journal were C12 member companies one year. Well, that caused a bunch of secular companies to be like, what's the deal? Like, how come, like, why are you guys winning all these things? And I remember one CEO going, well, man, I mean, there's a lot of things we're doing, but it really started me wrestling the question, like, if God help me see people the way you do, and how do I love them? And I've just been kind of on this journey of trying to figure out how do I love people well. And, 6 years later, that's a really good workplace culture, but it really started with the question of, like, how do I love people? And the secular CEO went, well, what'd you do to make them think you loved them? And he said, well, it wasn't a gimmick. He's like, no, I honestly began to see them, love them, and go, man, how do I care for them better? And he went, well, how'd you make yourself love them? And he was like, oh, well, this isn't a ploy. This is actually anchored in when you begin to live 24/7. Like, back to my earlier dilemma of, like, trying to honor God in the margins of life. I think if we're only a disciple of Jesus in the margins of our life, then by definition, we are a marginal disciple.
Oh, that's good.
But when we begin to be like a 24/7 disciple, that's way harder. Like, I've had to do way more confessing and repenting, and I'm more aware of my sin and flesh and selfishness, trying to be a disciple of Jesus in business. But it also makes every day an adventure that actually matters. And so we'll help people live that out.
Yeah, that is so good. What do you think? What do you think's at stake when the leaders with that level of influence separate their faith from their leadership?
A bunch. So I think, a simple sobering thing. I think we have a little bit of preview of it in the Bible. In the Old Testament, when there was the kings of Israel, we obviously know there was mostly bad kings. So there's a bunch of and so with a weird name did things just like his granddad did and was evil in the sight of the Lord. I don't think people listening to your podcasts who go to church are going to be hopefully ever listed as evil kings, but we are kings in our worlds. But then there was two other types of kings. There was a few great kings, Asa, Hezekiah, Josiah, folks who they loved God, but it said, and the whole kingdom flourished. Like they tore down high places, and they got rid of idolatry, and they made sure that no one was oppressing the poor. Like they did the hard work of leadership. that reflected their devotion to God. But then there was plenty of kings who would say, well, so-and-so didn't do bad things. He feared God, but he didn't go tear down high places. He didn't go do the hard stuff. And so the kingdom was still a hot mess, but he was privately, personally pious. And I think those kings were just kind of recorded as like, meh, like, okay, he wasn't evil, but he just kind of survived. And I think it'd be pretty sad to spend your whole career working so hard in business to then one day stand before God and be like, yeah, I know you loved me secretly, privately, and I know you didn't personally contribute to evil, but man, you had all this power and you did nothing with it. Like evil triumphed around you in your world and you didn't stop it in my name. I think that's sad. And I also think, when we live in suspended animation, if we spend 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week being in the world, holding our breath spiritually, that changes your metabolism. And I think it creates a schizophrenic kind of break in our lives where if you are depriving your soul and not living obedient and faithful and on mission with God most of your days, and you're just trying to then suddenly start the car and get super spiritual in the margins or waiting to retirement, I think that's a recipe for dysfunction, despair, and missing out on the bigger story and destiny. And it's not I don't approach this with man, the world's going to hell and, Terry, you and I've got to go save it. I think in Esther 4, a lot of people celebrate the verse in Esther 4:14 where when Esther's being challenged to do something courageous, he says, but what if for such a time as this, you were put in this position? Mm-hmm. But I love that her foster uncle Mordecai then says, but if you don't, hey, if you don't do this hard thing, God will rescue his people another way. Like the kingdom of God is not at risk. It's not like you and I are Luke Skywalker and the whole universe rests upon our faithfulness. He says, but you will have missed why God put you here. Mm-hmm. And I think, God's kingdom is advancing in wild ways. I think a lot of Christians are missing the adventure that they're invited into in their business. That also, as you experience, once you figure out how to run a business, at some point it gets a little boring because it's just kind of more of the same, and there's always new headaches, new levels, new devils. But at some point you're like, is it just more money, more scale? Like that's kind of boring.
Yeah. I love when you read about David, his life of ups and downs, but God's so intentional about keeping him in the genealogy and hard after God and all these different things. But when you get to the end of his life, it says David fulfilled his purpose in his generation.
Yes.
And then they buried him. And man, that's my heart cry. And I think to exactly what you're talking about, gets bored if this thing is just about amassing more stuff or doing things that have no eternal value. They don't fully satisfy, and there's an emptiness there. And so the success that's been defined by the world is hollow and empty. But it's not one or the other. We can chase these things that we've been gifted to do and we're passionate about and have both. It's pretty cool, really.
Yeah. I've come to wrestle with, and we still use both words in our world, but I think sometimes the word balance has been really popular the last 25, 30 years, work-life balance, balancing responsibilities. But what I don't like about balance as a word is it creates this mental picture. In fact, I even got, last year we did this in our company. If this is like faithfulness and this is work or success or profession, like balance makes me feel like I've got to okay, do I have too much? Am I over-indexing on business or over-indexing on spiritual things? Like I got to get these things balanced. And I appreciate the sentiment on that because we all know when life's out of whack. But I think the gospel actually calls for integration where it's like it's one thing. And so I was just talking with some executives yesterday where they asked me, how do you balance running a business that's trying to get sales goals and revenue targets and trying to make a difference? And I said, well, part of it is we in C12 kind of ask the question, how do you measure success of a company? How do I compare the success of Integrity, your contracting company there versus an IT company in Boston or a hospital in Atlanta? Totally different businesses. We would say, or my business, So I've got 35 employees like you do. I support 250 full-time chairs all around the world who are running their own businesses. It's a for-profit business model. And we got these 4,700 members all around the world running crazy kinds of businesses. I think every business has three capital types you're accountable for, three value adds. One would be economic value add. I think we should run good businesses. So I think growth and EBITDA and margins and quality measures and all those things are part of glorifying God. And if we're not a good steward of capital, then I think we're successful. But I also think we're responsible for team value add. All right, am I helping humans become more valuable, more fully alive, more skilled, more successful, more effective? Can I say that that person who worked with me for 5 years leaves here a more effective, successful human than I got them? And then spiritual value add. Have I actually shown the love of God, the truth of God? Have I demonstrated, proclaimed the gospel? Have I met needs in Jesus' name? And I think measuring all three of those things are part of like a triple bottom line success measure. And just like in my business, if I had high sales, but I had bad operations, or if I had high operations, but bad org dev, like at some point that business doesn't work. You got to have all those things.
Yeah.
I got to have all those three success categories.
Yeah, that's good. The trifecta. So one of the biggest challenges you talk about, I want to lean into this. I know we're going to run out of time before we run out of content, but I really want to just hone in on this. One of the biggest challenges you talk about the sacred and secular divide, the idea
Yep.
that faith belongs at church, not at work.
Yep.
Why do you think that belief has been so damaging?
Oh, it's hugely damaging. I think it creates it's like why does overeating cause problems? What causes diabetes and cancer and heart disease? Like that single thing of bad nutrition causes a dozen things to go wrong in our body.
Yeah.
I think this bad doctrine, it is bad theology, it is unbiblical, untrue. And candidly, like I've had great pastors, great churches. I was in my late 20s before I ever heard a single sermon challenging the sacred secular divide.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we spend most of our lives at work. And like the one thing most people in church have in common is they probably go to work in some kind. And I think the sacred secular divide causes 95% of the church, which are Christians who don't work for a church, to live their lives on the bench, believing they didn't get called into a institutional ministry job, that they were not called to kingdom work. And so it puts most of the church in reserved status, waiting to be called up for duty they never get, which also gives them permission to just go live carnal lives and try not to sin a little less, give a little more, and hold on till heaven. I think it robs the world of the blessing of people in workplaces and professions embracing their craft to the glory of God, saying, I am here to make the world a better place. I'm here to change this team, this environment. I'm here to redefine. I mean, I think we need more Christians changing healthcare and, government and construction. Like I think our crime and our poor integrity and our corruption are all somewhat side effects of Christians disengaged from their faith at work. I think it creates weak disciples, and I think it makes the church less potent and less dangerous. And it just bleeds on. It bleeds on. I mean, I had a good buddy of mine ran a warehousing company, super faithful to his church, elder, giver, billboard for his church. He had never led someone to Christ in his life. He started thinking about his business as a ministry, scaled his business from 300 employees to 700 employees, became the largest single employer of people transitioning out of homelessness in the city, created this incredible jobs program, had 38 people come to Christ in 1 year, had 140 people in Bible studies at work, meeting in different shifts in this 24/7 operation. I mean, the guy was running a for-profit venture that was just changing lives. But for 25 years prior, he'd been a Christian who was a professional who channeled all of his Christianity to what happened at his church on Sunday. And like what would it look like if we have the stats of what happens when businesses are ran this way. And I was just doing some math with my team. We're working on a 5-year planning process right now for our business, and was like, hey, we've got some big goals for 2030. And I was like, hey, if we achieve this goal and we don't get any better than what we're doing right now, At the current rate, that'd mean 50,000 people would be presented with the gospel every year in a workplace, every year, more that year than are today. Like 50,000 people would be hearing the gospel presented to them at work. We'd be seeing, 7,000 people come to Christ every year in a workplace. We'd be seeing $2.5 billion released in additional kingdom funding for projects. Like, the world can get changed pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's a big consequence.
Oh yeah. Sounds like you ought to write a book about that. So
I
when I'm listening, go ahead.
said I have a little conviction on the topic.
Well, when I listen to that, the issue is not willingness, it's identity. People just don't see themselves as called. They see someone being paid to do that. I think there's responsibility on both sides. The other side of that is the pastor there's to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. We've got to remind the people in the pew that, like, you have a ministry. You have a purpose, and you're not coming here for just to watch Christian karaoke on Sunday. This is really about training for you to go out and implement this. You're a marketplace missionary. I think there needs to be more language and more challenges both ways, and the result will be amazing.
We just did a thing this month. We've done it 3 times in our history. We'll kind of catch people off guard, and we'll at the end of one of our business forums. We have these monthly meetings, and people are usually in a group for 5, 10, 15 years. They get to know each other really, really well. But in January, we actually had said, hey, let's talk about this as a football. Like, what is business as a ministry? What is your identity? What can your business be? What should this look like? Question, do you want to, if you've been waiting for God to call you and say, Terry, you're being drafted. Would you like to come serve on my team? We'd like to offer you that today. Would you like to stand up and receive a full commissioning to be commissioned as the steward of your business as a ministry with a bunch of professions and acceptances? And people stand, we literally give them a certificate, like you'd be certified as an ordained minister in, a church setting. And I have been blown away by how many 63-year-old men start crying, going, I've been waiting my whole life to know if I was ever going to be called. Didn't know. Like, there is I think starting as early as youth group. I was at a church once where they were doing a seniors banquet to celebrate seniors, and they asked me if I'd do the closing talk. And I drove a point home. I said, hey, of the 45 seniors here, how many of you have acknowledged a call to full-time ministry? And 2 kids raised their hand, and everyone gave applause. And I said, what, girls like, I'm going to be a missionary in Africa. Kids like, I'm going to be a youth pastor. And everyone's cheering at their incredible faith. And I looked at the other 40 plus kids who didn't raise their hand and said, what about you? And he's like, I'm just going to be an engineer. Everyone else, I'm just going to be a teacher. I'm just going to, state school to study accounting. And I was like, oh, so you're just going to be a part-time disciple? Like, did Jesus not call you to be full-time about his kingdom? Just even at that point, like, we celebrate called, not called.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you didn't get called, then I guess I'm just gonna go do something.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the leaders that feel awkward or fearful about those faith conversations at work? How do you help them think about gospel influence in a way that's authentic and relational?
Yeah. So on the other side of that, I think there's 2 ditches. There's some people who make a mess of things because they've got ignorance, and they have a magnified sense of fear of, like, you can't do this. And the other people are ignorant and odd for God, sloppy, wacky. My first mentor in this space said, hey, Mike, don't overcomplicate this thing. This isn't about you going out there and, like, plugging Bibles in everyone's hand and having, like, awkward Jesus jujitsu moves on people. He said, can you focus on 2 things? He's like, here's the rails of your career. And this is as simple as it gets. He said, first of all, be excellent at what you do. Be so above reproach that the only thing someone can criticize you for is that you're a little too obsessed about Jesus. Make sure you're really good at your job. Ask God how he wants you to glorify him in the way you do your business. That'll give you audience, influence, respect. And then second, be so genuinely in love with Jesus that you're actually talking to him, thinking about him, and processing what he thinks about what you're doing all the time, so that when people talk to you, you're not looking for opportunities to bring him up. He just kind of oozes out because he's actually top of mind. And if you are in love with Jesus and doing business with him, for him, by him, you're going to find yourself having conversations about him, just like you talk about the show you watched last night, or the team you follow, or your kid. You talk about the things that are top of mind. And so I think at the simplest point, I'd say start there. Don't jump to awkward programmatic stuff. And then, especially in America, I mean, we've got groups in Malaysia and Ukraine and Kenya and places where we're very, very different. But in the U.S., you've got unbelievable religious liberty. We've got unbelievable freedom. And the reality is, if you are a good boss and you're running a good business and you're taking care of your people are going to want to know the why behind it. They're going to want to know the hope. And if you're taking care of customers well and you're running a business that has different, stands for integrity at a different level, man, you're earning the right to share. And the worst case scenario is maybe someone goes, "Hey, none of that religion crap," or "I don't want to hear that, Terry." Okay, I'm assuming you've been told no to a sale before. You've been told no to other things. So someone saying no thanks is not that big a deal.
No. You made a statement one time and I loved it. So you describe businesses as mega churches of unchurched people. And I know we talked about that just a little bit while ago, just about that sphere of influence, but can you highlight that just
Yeah,
one more time before we land this plane?
sure. I mean, if you think about, so the typical person who does identify as a Christian in America goes to church less than 2 times a month. But let's say you're a super Christian, they go to church every week. That's maybe an hour and a half a week that someone's in a church. You go to work with somebody, if you think about it as your employee, like they're typically worth you 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Week in, week out, good times, bad times. So your just timeshare of influence is exponentially more than an actual traditional pastor. Then when someone's far from God and they're going through addiction or divorce or grief or depression, they're not walking into local churches. They are retreating, but they go to work because they got to make a paycheck. And you may be the last place they stay at before they completely go into the ditch of life. Yeah. But you got a chance to shape them. And so the average business owner, what we quantify, because we actually score this, we measure this, the typical small, medium business in America, if you just have you're a construction company, will typically have influence on between 6,000 and 10,000 people every year through your business. I don't know what your town is like in Illinois, but I bet there's not a ton of churches there that got 6,000 to 10,000 people.
No.
And not a lot of them have 6,000 to 10,000 people who primarily are not churched. But you and I do in business. And so that's an incredible mission field that, frankly, you don't have to go raise support. You don't got to learn a language. You don't got to, you've got all the things. You just got to be, Matthew 5 says, "We are the salt of the earth. We're the light of the world." Be salty, be the light right where you are. And I think you can make the world a different place.
So good. What do you think would change if churches celebrated those workplace wins the same way we celebrate overseas missions?
I think it would change the game. I think
I do too.
I've never my pastor at my church does a better than average job of calling out the dignity and celebrating people. But if a mission team comes back from Mexico and has 6 salvations, or kids go to Africa and build a well, it'll be a church "Hey, everyone, let's celebrate this mission moment," which is great. But what about the suicide averted? What about the gospel conversation? What about the restored marriage? I know a guy who had 2 employees who he invested in their marriages and resources. They tore up divorce papers in his office because of him walking for a year. Why is that not a ministry win? That just because what we celebrate says a lot about what we value and what we expect. And
what gets repeated.
Maybe if I can squeeze in one more analogy, you'll love. I was in Korea a couple years ago for a big conference, and this female AI engineer from Canada was asked a question similarly about churches and professionals, and she said something that kind of killed the room. She said, "I grew up playing soccer, and if I think about church as a sport, and if the pastor is like the head coach, in most sports, the coach assembles a team of diverse players and skills and is celebrated for how well that coach is able to take this group of players, have them play in an orchestrated way, and score on the field. The coach doesn't go kick the field goal, doesn't get the winning point, doesn't jump in and grab the ball and do the winning play. The The coach is good because they can keep equipping a sequential series of players to play better than other players. It's like in the church, it feels like we expect the coach to be the player, and we celebrate good coaches because they give good locker room talks. But if the judge of a pastor was not how inspiring is their locker room talk, but what do the players do outside the locker room? Isn't Monday through Saturday the field of play? And shouldn't the judge of a church be what do your people do in those places the next 6 days? And then you come back to the locker room and you get, built up or kicked in the butt or whatever you got to do, but it's get back out there and play the game. What would happen if we began to judge pastors by what people lived that week, not by what he said on Sunday? That would change our whole church rating system.
Wouldn't it? Wow, that is powerful right there. That is what an analogy. I want to ask you one more question here that I want to know your answer as well as some of those listening. I think there's a lot of pastors out there that want to equip the marketplace leaders in their church. They don't understand their industries.
Yep.
What can these churches do well to activate people? Give them some ideas.
Yeah. I just went and did a talk to 500 pastors up in Wheaton, Illinois last fall. So there's a little talk on YouTube called the Amplify 2025 Conference, where I did a whole session just on this. But I think, pastors don't need to be experts in technology or roofing or construction to help. I'm not looking for a pastor. I don't think pastors need to suddenly become a be-all, know-all. Begin to expect everybody who sits in that room on Sunday morning is called by God equally to go live on mission for God, and begin to expect, challenge, and celebrate. How will you do what we talked about today, tomorrow, wherever your environment is, whether that's in a schoolroom, a warehouse, a factory. Just begin to expect it, envision it, celebrate it. Begin to ask those questions. My journey started by just asking the question, like, how do you be this in a big corporation versus a small law firm? Like, plant the questions, invite people to wrestle with God, and create the expectation that Jesus did most of his healings, teachings, and miracles during business hours and business places, not in synagogues and temples. I think is where Jesus still loves to do most of his great work. And how do we encourage people to just expect it and look for it? And I think just going on that messy journey with people and even confessing, I don't know what that looks like for you as a government employee or as a construction worker, but I do know this. I think that just opening the door would be a huge beginning.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. Mike, thanks for challenging the way we think about our calling, our leadership, and our impact. I mean, this has been so good today. We'll have to do a part 2 and drill down on this, because I think this is a message that it has to be amplified. And in a lot of ways, I think we're looking at our churches. How do we transform our cities?
Yeah.
And the answer is sitting right in front of us. They just need to be on mission. I wrote that down when you said that a while ago. I mean, the people in the pew is just like, they need to be on mission. It's like on point, they need to be on mission. And it solves so many things when you really begin to lean into your purpose. So,
Gary, I love your heart on this stuff. I love what you're doing. This has been too easy, too fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Listen, to the listeners today, your work matters. Your leadership matters. And your workplace may be one of the most strategic mission fields that God has entrusted you. So remember, culture, it's only as healthy as the leader. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer Podcast.
Thank you for joining us on Culture-neer, where every episode is a step forward on your leadership journey. We hope today's conversation sparked new insights and added real value to your life, empowering you to lead with greater strength and purpose. If you enjoyed what you heard, please connect with us. Follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content, and give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your support helps us grow our community and continue delivering conversations that matter. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep striving, keep leading, and keep inspiring.